Well, thank you.
You're
Well,
welcome.
welcome everybody. And for those just joining, we're recording this presentation. So if you don't wish to be seen or heard, then you can switch your camera off. You're still welcome to, of course, be with us. It is nice to see so many people here. This is the International Society for Research on Solitude, the ISRS, and this is the sixth in our seminar series. We have a series of seminars, but we do a lot of other things. So welcome to this seminar. I'll say a little bit about the ISRS before we carry on to today's seminar. My name's Julian Stern. I'm from Bishop Grosseteste University in Lincoln in the UK. I'm president of the ISRS, and I'm joined both for this seminar and in all of our work by Gosia Verwejko and Rafa Iwański, both from the University of Szczecin. Gosia is vice president of the ISRS. She is in charge of vice, and that is why she'll be introducing today's speaker. And Rafa is secretary of the ISRS. Today, we will be introducing Marie Stern, who will talk about, to the title, The Lonely Patient, about hospitals. But as I say, I'll mention something else about the ISRS. We were set up a couple of years ago in order to bring together a whole range of work, not just these seminars, but also I'll look on. We, as the ISRS, published the Bloomsbury Handbook of Solitude, Silence and Loneliness. And you see that myself and Gosia were two of the editors, along with Chris Sink from Seattle and Wong Ping Ho from Hong Kong in China. We also have had 3 conferences so far, 1 in York and 2 in Poland, and we will have our 4th conference in Lincoln next year, we hope. We have had special issues of journals. We are supporting the Journal for Silence Studies in Education, published by edited by Dat Bao in Australia. And with Bloomsbury, we've also set up a monograph series of books on solitude, anything to do with solitude from any discipline. And Bloomsbury agree that they will publish these books as they come through under the ISRS banner, and they will publish them, whichever discipline they come from, they will publish them on those discipline lists. So if you are a medic, or if you are a psychologist, or if you are a theologian, or if you are an educationist, and you wish to publish a book on solitude, either single authored or an edited book, please get in touch with us. The best way to find out about all the things happening on the ISRS is to look at our website. Our website is there on the screen, and you can search for it on Google, and you will see there you can join us. It is free to join the ISRS, and you will be on a mailing list for all those things, the conferences, the seminars, publications, and much more. So that's what I wanted to say about the ISRS, and our handbook, which is already out, came out last year. And there is more to come. So we will be introducing Marie Stern as the lonely patient, but I will not be introducing Marie. I will give that honour over to Gosia Verwejko. So Gosia, would you like to introduce Marie?
Thank you, Julian, for this lovely introduction. And we are sending you our warm greetings from University of Szczecin, waving at you from Poland. And me, Gosia Verwejko, our diligent ISRS secretary Rafał Iwański, and our great colleague Basia Chojnacka from the Institute of Education. We got together here to attend a seminar at the university. And I have the huge pleasure to introduce our wonderful today's guest, Marie Stern, who allowed me to introduce her. Marie, please listen and check on me whether everything I'm saying is accurate. So, because of genetic condition, Marie has been spending a lot of time in hospitals since her childhood.
Hello.
And hello. And
I'm sorry for my late.
Never mind, no worries. And as she says, even as a young child, she has learned that staff and the hospital environment may hurt you more than the medical treatment itself. Marie worked as a teacher, as a principal, at first in elementary schools, then in special schools, working with ill, disabled, injured, and dying children. Also trained teacher to work with these children. After a breakthrough experience, which happened a few years ago, and I think that Marie is going to tell us about it herself, she got involved into improving services across the hospital in whole, as well as inspecting patient care and training clinical staff. Was it okay, Marie? Do you accept it?
That's fine, thank you.
Great.
Good.
That is really pure pleasure, and we are delighted to have you here today and that you accepted our invitation. And I'm giving the floor to you, and we are all ears.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. As Gosha said, I've spent a lot of time in hospitals. And when I was a child, they were very frightening places. And they sometimes still are. But even when I was very young, I could see that the environment and the behaviour of the staff had a huge effect on the patients. Now, since then, I've seen wonderful advances in treatments. You know, we have fabulous machines that can diagnose what's wrong with us. We have so many improvements in surgeries and medication, and everything's grown and in many ways so much better. But it's still not always better in the communication with the patients. And that's something that I'm often talking about. It's something that's very basic, but still very real and very important. Gosha said a little bit about how I was a teacher, and all through that teaching, it was different to being a patient, but it really reinforced. I could really see how words, maybe badly used words, how communications really had a big effect on children. And I realised how important it is. So the experiences of both a patient and a teacher showed me that we have to give emotional support to people who are hurting. And when I say hurting, I might mean in any way. It might be physically hurting, emotionally hurting, people who are frightened. We've got to give them support. And that emotional support is every single bit as important as the scientific treatments that we give them. It's the words and the care are just as important as the medicines and the surgeries and the fabulous scans. It's those things that are really important. And if we don't do that, then patients can feel really emotionally alone in a very strange world. A few years ago, I had this long spell in hospital, and it left me feeling like a frightened child. And that fear didn't come from the illness or the treatments for the illness. It mostly came from the staff and the way they spoke to patients and the things they did. And I wanted to do something that could change that environment. And when I was a teacher, I always used to say to our new teachers and teachers coming to the school, and I had a sign on the wall, and it was something that I'd read in a Maya Angelou book when she said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And that had a big impact on me. And I very much thought of myself as a patient. And I thought that was powerful. And I also knew that Maya Angelou was a very powerful storyteller. And if you like, that was a huge change in my life. I feel a bit sometimes like you're on a pinball machine and you think you're going in this direction. And then something happens and somebody presses a button and you go over there instead. And sometimes you have that big incident that swaps things. So what I did was I wrote a series of stories for the hospital. And I wrote my stories, each had 3 parts. I talked about what happened, how it made me feel, and how I thought they could do it better. And I felt a bit arrogant doing that, but I did it, and I was still really ill, so I wrote it. Julian typed it for me and he sent it to them. And I think if it was me, I don't know if I'd have sent it, but Julian did. He posted it. And I didn't really expect to have an answer, but I did have answers, and that's led me to now working with the hospital and working with various groups of people and trying to make them understand how the communication is important. So obviously the hospitals I'm talking about are all in England. I don't know really how they compare with the hospitals in other countries, but I imagine that if you're a patient, you have a similar feeling wherever you are in the world. So I've said that hospitals could be lonely places. They're places where I've felt lonely. And I think some people could be puzzled. They'd be saying, but how can you be an individual? How can you be lonely in an environment which is full of people? And when I was writing that and thinking about it, the more I thought, I realized that the loneliness I was thinking about of being a patient was often the loneliness caused by alienation, a feeling that I'd gone into a really alien situation. And I was thinking about the way hospitals make us feel like other. And I realized that the source of that loneliness is, as I've said, about the behavior often of the people who are there to care for us. Now, we always used to say in England, our NHS, our National Health Service, is the best in the world. Well, it's really struggling at the moment. But we always spoke about it being ours. It's ours, it belongs to us. And I think if it's really ours, then we should be in partnership with the people looking after us. And probably the partnership with the people who care for our health is as important or more important than the closest people to us. When we're sick, we really need them. That should be a really close partnership. But it doesn't always feel like that. It doesn't always feel as if we're equal. We know that if we're traveling and we're visiting a strange country, that can be really exciting and it can be really enriching. But if it's too different, it can make us feel anxious. And if it feels too alien, it can make us anxious. And too alien, I mean, we don't know what to do. We don't understand the rules. We don't know what the dangers are. We don't know how to behave. We don't know who's a safe person and who's not safe. And most of all, I think we feel very threatened if we feel that we're not welcome there. So if you have all those feelings that might make you unsafe, if you're also in a hospital where you're physically hurting, you're ill, you're afraid for your future, that becomes an enormous stress. And I think it's the stress enough to affect our recovery. So I want to describe some reasons why I think patients feel lonely and to suggest some ways that hospitals might help us. So when I spoke before, I gave a little bit of a seminar before. The first thing I had to do was thought, oh, I'd do a little bit of research. So I Googled and I was looking for pieces of writing or research on loneliness of patients in hospital, and I couldn't find them. I found lots of things about loneliness, mostly about elderly people living in isolation and how that impacted their health. And I found things about younger people maybe who have chronic illness and disabled, and maybe they're feeling lonely, and usually it said go out and make some friends, you know, just like that's easy. But I couldn't find anything about people who were lonely because they were in the hospital setting. So because I couldn't find research, I'm going to give you some stories of my own. My first story comes from a long time ago, but for me it set the scene. It's the basis of my feelings about hospitals, I think. And it's an important story because it tells you how important communication is. So this is one of my vivid memories. I'm not sure how old I was, but as I tell you the story, you'll realise I was very small. And I was taken to a lecture theatre, which was, you know, horseshoe benches going up in tears, and they were full of people, and they were all men, as I recall. I don't think I knew that women could be doctors till I was about 7. A nurse undressed me, which immediately, you know, you want to have some covering, which is immediately threatening. And she passed me up to a big man on the stage. And this was a big man with a stick in his hand. And he stood me on a chair. So you can see I was little. He lifted me onto the chair and he's talked about me. And he was pointing to me and prodding me and moving my arms and moving my head. And sometimes he was pointing at the board with his big stick. And of course, I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. I've no idea. But I felt the loneliest person there, this little girl on the chair with all these people watching. And when he finished talking, all the people from the rows came and stood in a line, and they also did the same things. They touched my skin and my body and moved me. And many years later, I was teaching children about the slave trade, and I was reading about slave markets and the slave masters examining the people to see if they would be strong. And I thought, oh gosh, it just took me back to that place. Now, that was a really long time ago, and I really hope that no doctors would do that to a child now. But I'm sure there are many people of my age in hospital settings who've had similar things. And I've often thought, did that man, well, I call him the big man, but he must have been the consultant, did he ever think about what he was doing to me? And would he have thought that that left me feeling so frightened and threatened? And did he think that? And the more I thought about it, I think they probably didn't actually consider how I was feeling at all. Did they even think it? So the way staff speak to patients or speak about them in their presence can have a lifelong effect. And it does make us feel like we're the alien in the world. If you've ever seen the film The Elephant Man, you know that the man who's really deformed has a very similar experience, and I found that very moving. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the world of hospitals. As a child, when I went into hospital, the first thing I realised was the smell, that antiseptic smell. And in a child's mind, that was always linked with the injection or the stitches. So the smell was off-putting. I don't often smell that antiseptic smell now. So my impressions are more to do with finding the way around this foreign world. And sometimes the staff and the signposts don't help you. So the nurse says you've got to go down there to the X-ray, but you go down there and it doesn't say X-ray on the door, it says radiology or radiography. Or the nurse says go over there and knock on the door where it says blood testing, but you go there and it says phlebotomy. So we're already from the beginning, we're using different words and different signs, and it's a difference between our language and theirs. They live in a world of medical terms and acronyms. They're always using acronyms. And sometimes you look at the signposts on the wall and it looks like somebody's sort of just picked out some Scrabble tiles and sort of put them down in a random order. And that's what you're reading. You're reading a list of initials and you don't know what it means. So from that very first contact, we're reminded that we're not really partners because we don't have that knowledge. And thinking of looking at the Scrabble tiles as well, the words that don't make any sense to us. I was reminded of going to Poland, where I don't have a hope of working out all these long words. And in some countries, I can kind of work them out, but couldn't work them out. But the big difference was I knew that the people around me were friendly and they would help me. And if I was in the shop and I said, where can I find the milk? Somebody's going to show me. So I had a good time. And I asked Gosha if you play Scrabble, because while we were there, I was in a coffee shop and I happened to sit next to an Englishman. And I don't normally chat to strange men in cafes in England, but for some reason I do in Poland. And he said, oh, this language is brilliant because all these Zs, think of all the Scrabble scores, but I guess you score them differently. they would be tens in England, but I'm sure that they're not in Poland. So we're already alone in this strange world, and we go to find our destination. We meet the clinical staff. Some of them will greet us. They'll have some eye contact. They'll smile at us. Some of them will use our names, but not all of them. Our names are really important to us. They're one of the few things that we really own. But some of them just refer to us as a body part. So I might be a left shoulder, or I might be a right knee. And sometimes when they're talking over me as this is a left shoulder or a right knee, sometimes I feel like, are you saying I'm a pain in the neck? And I hope that everyone understands that. And every one of these exchanges is taking away a bit of our personhood. I have a story from a friend. She had cancer and she went through the whole journey of having tests and biopsies and surgeries and chemotherapy and radiotherapy, that long journey with all these traumatic things. When she was recovered, I said to her, what was the most frightening part of that journey? And she said that it was when she used to go for chemotherapy. She used to go in as an outpatient into a big department, set out in chairs. And she said that when you were in there, the nurses referred to the patient as by the chair number. So she would be, on Monday, she would be chair number 7. On Friday, she would be chair number 12. And she said every time that happened, it made her cry because she thought, how can they be looking after me if they think I'm a piece of furniture? She said, I'm lots of things. I'm a woman and a mother and a grandmother. I'm a friend. I'm many things. But when I'm there, I'm just a piece of furniture. So how can I know that they will properly look after me? And I asked her and she said she told them that. And I said, what was their response? And she said they were really surprised. They said they'd never thought of it. It had never occurred to them. So what we want and we need is really simple. We want the health professionals to see us as individuals and whole people, not just the bits that hurt. We want them to listen and engage in real dialogue. If you've ever listened to a man called Professor Stern, you might have heard him talk about dialogue. And how dialogue could be disguised as a monologue and dialogue could be. Is that right, Julia? Anyway. We want them to explain things in a way that we can understand. And we want them to check that we can understand. Sometimes we're embarrassed to say we don't understand. We want them to see that they can maybe understand our fears and our hopes for the future. We don't want them to just look at us for today. We want them to think of us as people with a future and lives to live, that we need to get well and thrive in the future. And we want to believe that they're at least trying to understand our fears. Very often in hospital, I've discovered that if you express some fear or some doubt, people will very glibly say, don't worry, or it will be fine. And that makes me even more worried, really, because I think, how do you know it will be fine? It might not be fine. They're very glib things that say you're not really understanding what I need. One of my recent surgeries, I had an anaesthetist and he said a few words, and those few words made such a difference to me. He said, I will be beside you, taking care of you for the whole time. And I thought that's very different to saying, don't worry, because that sounded real, sounded like he understood and he was going to be beside me, looking after me. That was his job. And also when you have an operation and you're asleep, you really need to think that somebody's somebody's looking after you. Now, people go into hospital for a whole range of reasons. Sometimes it's planned. They know they're going in 2 weeks and they have time to prepare. They've had time to accept that they need some treatment. And I hope that they've been given some good information about what needs to happen to them and why it needs to happen. And I hope they've been given good enough information to manage their expectations. I have to say, I've been given patient leaflets, and last time I was given a leaflet of information before a knee surgery, and bear in mind I've already had about 8 other knee surgeries, and I could barely understand a word of it, but so they're not always good. So when things are planned, you at least have the opportunity to take some familiar personal things, your own night clothes, maybe your comfortable slippers. And people would bring links from home, the photographs, greetings cards, things from home, so that to make that little tiny space, to make it their little bit in this strange environment. But now, since COVID, I don't know if this happens everywhere, but in our hospitals, people can't do that now. You can't bring in the photographs. If somebody sends you cards, you have to put them in the cupboard. You can't have flowers. So you can't even really make that little tiny little island of your own anymore. And I think that's a big pity, because that little bit of trying to make your own bit of home was important. Sometimes people go into hospital in an emergency and they're in pain and they're in shock from the accident or whatever's happened, and their world's just changed really suddenly. They might have no personal things with them except their clothes, their jewelry, their shoes, and the professionals take them away. And every time these things are taken away, these people could be reduced until really all you've got is that band on your wrist with your name and your number. And you might be surprised at how many hospital staff will come to you lying in bed and just take your hand and read what's on the band without talking to you. I find that extraordinary, really, that they wouldn't even say hello. So, as well as being really depersonalizing, I think it's really infantilizing. We don't know the people. We don't know the staff or the people in the other bed. And we're a bit like children on the first day at school. We don't know where the bathrooms are, or are we allowed to go to the bathroom? We don't know if we're going to be given food and drink. We don't know the rules. And that feeling about being at first day at school, really the important thing is we don't know who to trust. And when we're already hurting and fearing and thinking, am I going to get better? Will I get better? Will I be cured? This is really lonely. And I do clearly remember being about 7 and waiting for an operation. Other children in the beds, everyone's having surgery, the nurses are bustling around all the time. And I was really afraid of what's going to happen and afraid of how much it would hurt. But most of all, I felt so lonely in that bed. And I felt so lonely because there was nobody I could express that fear or pain to. And even if I felt I could, I probably wouldn't have had the words. So why don't patients say when they're lonely? Well, I've said that we feel like children in a strange world. And so first of all, like the child at school, mostly we want to be well behaved. We want to be good. We don't want to be trouble. We want them to like us and think that we're good. And also we want to be brave. We don't want to admit that we're afraid. And we think if we say that we're lonely, there's also the shame that comes with loneliness about, you don't have friends, something about loneliness being shameful. And I can actually imagine saying to a nurse, I'm feeling lonely. And the nurse saying, oh, don't be so silly. Look at all these people. I could just imagine that. Saying, have a chat to the person in the next bed. Well, maybe she's feeling lonely and fearful as well. And it's interesting, I find, because when you are a patient, people ask you questions all day long. Have you had your medication? Are you comfortable? Do you need a drink? They ask lots of questions, but I've never known anyone ask about emotions. And I've certainly never known anybody ask about feeling lonely. And I know that patients with conditions like cancer would be given some emotional support from specialist nurses, but I've never seen or heard of that emotional support on more general wards. So I think that we need to help staff understand that. A few decades ago, when I was in hospital, chaplains would come around and talk to people and ask if they needed any help. And if you wanted to talk to a chaplain, that would be a good person to talk about emotional problems. But now they don't do that. The hospitals I know do have a team of chaplains, often multi-faith, but now the patient has to request that. And often patients don't, because they believe that they need to have a religious belief. They don't realise that they could ask to talk to a chaplain, and they don't need to be religious. We need staff who will eradicate the really obvious barriers to communication. They might be really practical ones. I was once in a ward where a woman just opposite me, the batteries ran out in her hearing aid, and she spent 2 days crying because she couldn't hear anything. And she said, I was already feeling frightened, and now I can't communicate with people. I can't hear them. Now I'm terrified. And actually, it was a physiotherapist who went to get some new batteries for her. He did that in his lunchtime. I'm saying that because I know physiotherapists in the audience. Some patients have learning disabilities. They have dementia. Sometimes they have both. And it can be so hard for them to understand what's happening and to express their needs. So staff need training in helping them to do that. We definitely need to know if English isn't a first language. One of the things we do at our hospital now is we've linked up with students in schools, students of about 16, 17-year-olds, and we bring them in to talk to people who have dementia and to chat with them and talk about their day or read to them. And I'm thinking I would really like to extend this so we can find people around us in the community who have other languages, because we can bring in translation service to talk to people about their symptoms and their treatment and the urgent things. I think it would be lovely if we could bring in people to chat sometimes if someone isn't speaking English, or somebody to read, somebody to talk about things that they share at home, that human connection. I've said that hospitals and staff have their own language. It's familiar to them, and they can forget that we don't always understand it. And sometimes they don't check whether we can understand. I remember waking up from a surgery and the anaesthetist coming to me and saying, your hemoglobin is 6.2, and then he was gone. And I'm lying there thinking, what's hemoglobin? It was 6.2. Is that really good? Is it really bad? I've no idea. And now he's gone and I can't ask him. I only worked it out when they gave me some blood transfusions. And it's that listening and the questions. And sometimes it's about asking another question. Another story of me being in a room with a very elderly lady who was quite confused. I knew what had happened to her because somebody had told me. She'd had a fall, she'd broken her leg really badly, and she had some major surgery to fix her leg. And the doctor came to her the next day and he said, how are you feeling? And she said, I'm fine. And he said, how is your pain? And she said, oh, I'm fine. So he went away again. And then she said to me, who was that man? And I said, that was the doctor. And she said, why am I seeing the doctor? And I said, well, you've had an operation to fix your leg. And she said, I had an operation? Why did I have an operation? And I said, because you've broken your leg and they fixed your leg for you. And she said, well, that must be why it hurts so much, because the pain is terrible. Now, I knew that she must be in terrible pain because I'd had my leg pinned and, and mended at the same day, and my leg hurt. So I thought, hey, if he thought about it, he must think she probably doesn't really feel fine. Maybe he should have asked another question. And people don't always do that. They don't give you the opportunities to say a bit more. And I think that's something that would be really missing. As I say, I'd also had some really badly broken bones mended in surgery. And the next day, it was about maybe 4 in the morning or something, the nurse came to me and said, why are you still awake? And I said, because every time I close my eyes, I can hear the bones breaking. And he said, oh, and he went away. And that would have been a good time to say to me something like, oh, that must be horrible, or that must have been frightening, but he didn't. He said, oh, and went off. Let me see, I'm looking at the time. Of course, it's not just other patients who are there. Sorry, the professionals who are there. There are other patients too. And another improvement that maybe isn't such an improvement was in the old hospitals. There used to be maybe 20 or 30 beds in a long room. But in the middle, there would be long tables, so you could get out of bed and go and sit together to eat. Or there would be a room at the end with maybe a television where you could go with other patients. And those things seem to have gone now. And now it's a bit different. People are in smaller rooms where maybe they can't talk to people so often. I think most of our hospitals seem to have beds now for rooms for 4 or 6 patients, and sometimes for 1 patient. If you have an infection or you're very susceptible for infection. And sometimes you are on your own. I've been on my own in a room for about a month, and sometimes wish I had someone to talk to. There was one department I had to go to for some months, and I went 3 times a week for intravenous injections and transfusions. And that was very different. We were together, all the patients were together in a circle. Our treatment took about an hour and a half. We were encouraged to talk to each other, to share knowledge about what had happened, what we found help, how to help one another, what I found I could eat, what I found I could do. And that sharing was really good and really helpful. And we all celebrated as well, and people got better. Now, as I'm going through this, talking about this, talking and listening and inviting communication about feelings, I'm thinking to myself, well, I know that a lot of time the staff will say, but we don't have time for this. This is extra work. And I think you have to tip this around a bit and look at it in a different way. I think at the moment we think, here is the science stuff, here's the interventions, the surgery, the medicines, the treatments, and here is the talking. But actually, we put them together. And if we saw that the talking and the human contact and the warmth was every bit as good as the medicine and every bit as important as the medicine, then you might see that it's vital. And it's a vital part of the treatment. And then maybe people could find more time. Staff used to come to me to set up transfusions, to give me injections. They were all times when we could have talked, but they very rarely did. I found even after a month in one room, the staff would not have been able to tell you a single thing about me. But I knew a great deal about them, because when they were making the bed or whatever, setting things up, they talked to each other all the time. I knew where they'd been on holiday, their favourite food, who's got a new boyfriend, who's buying a new car. They didn't know anything about me. The only one time I can think that somebody knew something about me was a doctor who picked up a book that I was reading and said, oh, are you reading this? And had a little chat about the book. which is another thing that's lost, isn't it, by not having your little personal things around you, where somebody might say, oh, are they your children? Or is that your husband? So I started this talk by saying that we need real partnership between staff and patients. The patients need to feel that the hospitals are there for us. The clinicians are working to lead us to healthy, full lives. But at the moment, it often seems that we're doing it on their terms and not always as real partners. If we're real partners, they will take time to make us feel involved by talking about feelings, finding out where we want to go in this journey. When as Gosha said, I work with local hospitals, and I do pretty much often what I'm doing now. I just talk about the stories and things that have happened. I have hundreds of them, so you're pleased you won't be getting all of them today. And over again, I have staff say, we didn't know that. We never thought of it. We didn't think about how you hear the words. We didn't think about how you're lonely when you don't hear the words. Nothing that I don't feel that I've said anything that's clever today. I feel that what I've said and what I'm looking for takes us back to the absolute fundamental aspects of patients' care by looking at the relationships and considering how you make a true connection and reduce the loneliness. And sadly, I think that wonderful advances in science and new procedures have meant that things happen so quickly that there are fewer of those connections than they were. And I would like to bring them back again, real connection, so you're not sitting there as a lonely patient. Okay, thank you. Phew.
Very good, very good.
Thank you. Oh, excuse me. Thank you so much. Marie.
Yes.
I'm sure I recognised you from something, Marie. There is some time for some questions or comments. Oh, the screen's changed, so we're all there. If you wish to ask a question, you can put your hand up electronically, or indeed you can call out if you want. If you want to ask anything, we have a few minutes to be able to do that. Claire, I see Claire's hand up. Hi, Claire.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Marie, thank you so much. I always love hearing your stories, and it always reminds me we do just have to keep coming back to the basics. What I'm curious to hear about is I know you've been working with the hospital for a number of years now. Do you feel like you're just Groundhog Day, saying the same thing over and over, or do you feel like people are beginning to get a bit more of a shift in understanding that we have to really care about people?
I think that both of those. Sometimes I can see a real change in something. When I said at the beginning that I wrote stories and I put it in 3 parts, what happened and how I felt and what could make it better, one of the things I talked about was when they're rehabilitating you after a big surgery and you can't go home until you prove that you can walk up and down the stairs. And in this particular hospital, the stairs was a wooden set of stairs out in the corridor. And they came to me and they took me out to the corridor, and there was a row of chairs of people drinking. It's just by the drinks machine, a row of chairs of people drinking. And there was a pharmacy, and here's a row of chairs for people waiting for their medicine. And I, in my little short hospital gown, had to show the physiotherapist that I could walk up and down the stairs. And it was the first time I was there. And I've not been good at walking up and down stairs for many, many years. And they wanted me to do something I haven't been able to do for years. And they were getting cross with me. And all these people were watching. And my leg was bleeding. And people were saying, oh, have you seen that lady's leg? So I told them a story like that. And then I told them how I felt. And now in that vast hospital, they have taken away all of those stairs that were in public places and put them in private rooms. So when something like that happens, I feel it's a really major victory, and I feel it's something really important. It seems like one of the most important things I've ever done. But the bit where I do feel I'm on Groundhog Day, and I have to keep saying it, is the really fundamental thing. Like when you get there, the first person you meet needs to smile at you and say hello and look like they're welcoming. They're the things that you have to keep on saying. How those tiny first encounters are really important. Yeah, so sometimes it is about going round and round.
Yeah, so important, but keep going.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. And Jill, you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you so much, Marie. That was really valuable. I think you probably know I've got Paul sitting next to me, listening into this, because he was very interested in what you had to say, and he said, would I relay to you that everything you said about both your childhood and the experience you've had as an adult, he recognises absolutely, in that kind of that dehumanizing, if you like, of a person, the stripping down of the person and making that person into the shoulder, the component part. And he wanted to listen in because I know you've had conversations about it. What I'm interested in is how, as a patient, when you're vulnerable, because we all go into hospital and we feel really vulnerable, how do you find that voice? Do you have advice for people who struggle in that respect, who can is there a way of finding a voice as a patient, or is it down to somebody to advocate for you, do you think?
Well, that's interesting you say that, Jill, because this is where I feel like a bit of an imposter and a fraud, because I can go to a room with a whole 100 doctors and nurses, and I can talk about it, these things, and I can write blogs that get published in the hospital newsletter, and I can be video talking, and I can do all those things. But when I am the patient in the bed, I can't.
You can't.
No.
Yeah, and it's the emotional element of it that actually prevents you from doing it. And I was sitting here trying to, we've both been sitting here feeling really angry on your behalf and on behalf of, patients that you're advocating for, because I'm sure we all have stories that we can tell to a lesser degree, but we've all got those stories. Do you think there's a place for, I don't know, volunteers or something to come in and to be that advocate for vulnerable people?
I think that's a really good suggestion, and it's also about how it's done, because hospitals do have a system where people do go and talk to their patients. Yeah. And volunteers do that. Volunteers do it at our hospital, but you've got a very specific list of things, and they've quite closed questions. And the questions are, did you find the nurses compassionate? And you have to score it. It's those things that say, go from never to excellent. Yeah. And you think, that's not really the right question, because the patient who's feeling vulnerable is likely to say, oh yes, they were all right.
Yes, fine, yes, because
you're too scared. But also that I think they're really misleading, because they say, are the nurses nice? You think, well, there were 10 of them, and 6 of them were lovely. 2 of them were not so good. One really frightened me, and the other one, I never spoke to her. Yeah. But that there isn't a way of recording that. So sometimes I think that they think they're recording the information, but it's not really the useful information, is it?
And do you feel as though those questionnaires are there simply to tick the boxes for the statistics?
Yeah, I think they probably are. Yeah. I think unless you can qualify it somehow, and also that it's so silly sometimes, because I was sent to do one of these recently, and this thing about were the nurses nice, compassionate, And I'm talking to somebody who's been there for 3 weeks and somebody who's been there for 3 hours.
Yes.
You know, and you think, well,
Yeah.
is this like real information for you?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's no, I don't think it's always really useful.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So are there other questions from, I think there is. Jarek.
Hi, hello.
Yes, hello. It was nice to hear all the story. And I try to analyze it from the perspective of feeling how to feel how to feel that somebody is in a relationship. Because for me to be in a relationship, it means to share the same goal, to pursue the same goal, to pursue the same good. And I think that after the possibility to hear a story, that the problem is that the patient don't understand what is happening when he or she is at hospital. And I wonder how to enable the patient to participate in the whole process of healing, of how to enable them to participate. Because sometimes you have said that sometimes we are in we are between a lot of people, but we pursue different goals. So we are separate individuals, but not the persons in a community. And it is that questions could be much more difficult if it concerns the children, because it is the question how much we can say to them about their stance, about their situation, how it can develop, and so on. What do you think about this information, about this participation? Because sometimes it is possible that you can talk with somebody, but it is external relationship and not the relationship connected with the situation and the story of your life and the position you are at the moment.
I think that we have to accept that the clinical staff don't have a long time to build a relationship with us. They have to do it in a very short space of time, which means they've got to be even better at doing it. And some of them are just tiny little things, like somebody fleeting by saying, how are you feeling? Is different to somebody coming and sitting beside you and looking in your face and looking in your eyes and saying, how are you feeling? And giving the allowing you to feel that they really are interested and they really do want to know that they're there for you and for your future. And I'm interested when you say about with children, how much do you tell them? And that is a difficult one as well. And I think people often forget that children may not understand everything, but they do pick things up and they want people to be honest. They don't want you to tell them lies. If a doctor as a child said to me, this isn't going to hurt, and it does, I'm not going to trust them again. Well, even as a grown-up, actually. And I can remember another really frightening thing from when I was a child. I hurt my hand badly and got a bad infection in it. and we were at the hospital, and the doctor told my mother that I was probably going to lose my arm. They would make up their minds the next day if I was going to have my arm amputated. And they spoke as if I wasn't there and I didn't know what they were talking about. And of course I did. I did hear these words and I did know what it meant. And I was terrified. And that evening, it was very hot summer and I was thirsty. I wanted a drink. And the lights were off, just a little tiny night light. And they brought me a glass and I could see something floating in it. And I thought, this is the medicine to make me to go to sleep so they can cut my arm off. So I didn't drink it. I was really thirsty, but I didn't drink it. I poured it out of the window, naughty girl. And the next day in daylight, I realized that because it was really hot, they were putting ice cubes in the water. So there was a child who heard something, but nobody explained, heard something frightening. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody told me. But I overheard and I made my own conclusions. And I think now, when I think of that story, I feel really sad that I didn't drink that water because I was so scared. And tipping the water out of the window was quite a naughty thing for me to do, but that's how frightened I was. So I think that people really, really need good practice in how to talk to children. And that there is some good practice, I know. And I know that now hospitals, you know, sometimes with little children now, they can use puppets and toys. And one of the things that our hospital does to help children who are frightened is they will bring in dogs, specially trained dogs, or they will bring in, they'll let them ride in little special cars and things, and they ride their own car to the operating theatre. There's a lot more knowledge now about children, but I agree with you, it's hard to, it can be hard to give children some knowledge without frightening them, but I'm sure there are ways to do it. But important, I think, to do it honestly. Don't pretend that it's going to be fine. Be honest and try. But also, if you're looking at fears of children, you have to think about what they're picking up from their parents as well. And it's more likely that their parents are scared. So perhaps there the skill comes from making the partnership with the parent as well as the child. It is a difficult one, I know. And they do have a very short time to make this very, very important relationship. So they have to be, how do you present yourself as trustworthy from the first minute, but then don't break that trust by saying things that are not true. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know if I answered that at all.
I agree that that's
Thank
sometimes the problem is that that we don't understand what it happens with us. So yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And there's, I think, a lesson I would add. There's a lesson from dogs, a lesson to learn from dogs, which is children often, when they're lonely or frightened, like the companionship of dogs. And if you ask them why, it's two things: the unconditional regard that a dog will have for them, which we can also have, but don't always have. We often have conditional regard. You know, if you do this, then we will be happy, not we care for you no matter what. But also that dogs shut up. They care for you without telling you things, without insisting on telling you things all the time. So sometimes the lessons for human beings are be more like a dog, show care, and don't think you have to be talking all the time, but you do have to be regarding all the time and listening all the time. So it's the skill of listening like a dog and caring like a dog, and not always talking like a doctor or a nurse or a physiotherapist, but listening like a human being and talking if necessary. Rafa, you have your hand up, or someone in the room has their hand up.
Me.
It's Gosia. Hi, and Piotr as well. So, but Gosia first.
I have more a comment than a question, Marie, because I have something in my mind, an association that came to my mind, that teaching and treating students and treating patients at hospital have something in common.
Very much.
You know what I mean already. Because you can teach things without seeing people in those students, without seeing them, without knowing their names, their situation. I think that it is equally important when it comes to our occupation. So I think that it is not only about treating people in hospital, but also, for example, education, where you can treat them anonymous, you know what I say, anonymously, without treating them personally. So I think that we can apply all of that you just said to our job as well. That was just a comment.
I think I think there are real links. That's why I find it interesting being a patient and a teacher. And you know, I worked in a special school with children, young people who had really quite severe emotional problems and behaviour problems. And one of the things that I introduced, and it really worked very well, was to tell the staff to ask the children things about the family. So on Monday morning, say, did you have a good weekend? Somebody's mum's having a baby, say, how's the baby? And also to send cards to people. So if somebody in their family had a baby, we send them a present. Somebody was in hospital, we send them a card. And just involving their families in that way. I would write a letter if somebody had a death in the family. And it was really, really important for them. And they hadn't been in schools before where teachers did that. But it was really made a big difference in our relationships.
Yeah, I agree. There's respectful treating.
Yes. And I always went to visit children if they were in hospital as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Also for the speech. It was amazing.
Thank you. Piotr, it's good to see you, and good picture behind you as well. I'm trying to work out where it is, but
it's from the very center of Toruń, and you can see behind me Nicholas Copernicus.
Yes, I knew who it was.
I thought it was. Piotr, do you have a question or a comment?
Staying in Toruń. Okay, so thank you for the occasion, the possibility of sharing some of my remarks, rather comment than answer, than a question. But at first, thank you, Mary, for your incredibly interesting lecture. I listened to it with great attention, and I'm glad that and thank you for raising the very important issue of the loneliness of sick and especially hospitalized people. And what you said is not only to me truly moving. And one could say that a hospitalized person suffers doubly. And this suffering is paradoxical in a Camusian sense. On the one hand, one is suffering what is obvious from an illness that destroys and alienates such a person from previous lives and interpersonal relationships. And on the other hand, it is the hospital, the doctors, the nurses, the co-patients, a place and people with whom each of us, being in the role of patient, associates rather the hope of improving our existence and returning to life and relationships. But it turns out, however, that this place and these people binds the hope of getting out of the alienation of the illness instead of helping in this, instead of supporting this process, willingly probably more often willingly, drive patients into even more desperate alienation. And one might ask rhetorically, does anyone know a more alienating place than a hospital? I am reminded at this moment of probably known a lot of us person, namely Clifford Beers, who was a founder of the American mental hygiene movement and an author of the biographical book entitled The Mind That Found Itself. Clifford Beers, as we probably know, he personally suffered from bipolar affective disorder. And in his book, he recalls his stay in a psychiatric hospital. And the main idea of this book is that a sick person is further marked by society, by having to be isolated in a hospital. This isolation, which activates a sense of alienation, is compounded by the way that patient is treated. And this is particularly true for people with mental illness, as arcs Beers. And he says also that the only reason he didn't break down and sink into a sense of constant alienation was that he chose to resist it. However, how many of us can find that much strength in ourselves? And maybe in the end of my short comment, a question to you, Mary. What do you think? Are we doomed to fight the illness and the medical system alone, like Beers, or are there any constructive solutions that can help those affected by alienation in situations of illnesses and hospital isolation?
I think it really does make a big difference if you have a support network outside the hospital, somebody else who can support you and speak for you and give you the courage. I mean, it might be that it's hard because you don't have the courage. It might be it's hard to speak for yourself because you're so ill. It does make a big difference to have somebody, a support network outside, which of course not everybody has that support network. And as I was writing this, I had in my mind all the time that I haven't mentioned mental illness. But of course, that's a whole nother big issue. And of course, many of the patients who go into hospital with a broken leg or whatever will also have a mental illness. I mean, I was aware when I was writing it that that was too big for me to include here. But you're absolutely right. I think that if I can feel alienated and frightened and like a little child, what more can it be like for somebody who's also got a mental illness, and also sadly, and this is very sad, knowing that many of the hospital staff will judge them by that mental illness and think that they're not, maybe not so valuable. People still can't find it hard sometimes to accept a mental illness. And if the staff are dealing with your physical illness, your emotional turmoil because of that, and your mental illness, that's a really big group of problems to bring. And I'm aware of that. And you're absolutely right. It's something that we need to think about and maybe find, wouldn't it be good if each person in that situation could be given an individual to not be beside them. I don't mean be beside them all day, every day, but somebody there to speak for them and with them if they need that. And that wouldn't have to be a doctor or a nurse, would it? It could be sort of an advocate to be there and partner them. That would be. Oh, I think I've got a good idea now. I'm going to revolutionise this service.
Good. And you asked, Piotr, if there's anywhere more alienating. I think prison is more sometimes similarly alienating, but that is part of what some people see prisoners doing intentionally to punish people, whereas hospitals, as you say, are supposed to be are also supposed to be curing. There was a famous book about a patient in a mental hospital, Joanne Greenberg, a fictional name, called "I Never Promised You a Rose Garden," and it became a film. And her original title for the book was "The Little Maybe," because in talking with another patient, she said, "What's different about this hospital? What's better about this hospital?" And the other patient said, "Amongst all the other things, there is that little maybe. There is a sense that something maybe could change." And even that little maybe, given by the Frieda von Reichmann, who was the psychiatrist they both had, that sense of perhaps there is a way through this, perhaps there is something. So I'm not a pessimist about either mental health or physical health myself. But Michal or Michael, Yannick, you had a question.
Yes,
and
that's correct.
I think you maybe can talk for hospitals as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mari, for sharing your lovely story. Very captivating. Yes, I'm working for the NHS myself, but from the commissioning side, so I don't do face-to-face. So I was very interested to join this session. I don't have a direct question, just a reflection, Mari. Just sort of curious why compassion and empathy is that sort of part of the training or part of the one of the modules that GPs or when you train for nurses, would that be part of the sort of curriculum when they're starting the career?
It is, and in the NHS we have a thing called the 5 C's, and you watch. I'm going to forget them now, isn't it? It's compassion, care, communication, courage, which is the courage to speak up if something's wrong. What's the other one? I can't remember. But so we do, and there is a lot taught, but it's making sure that you make those connections. A couple of years ago, my doctor's surgery where I go, they knew I had this condition, and they said, "Will you come and talk to our new doctors?" And I gave them a talk for a while, and afterwards, the doctor who invited me said that when I'd gone, they all said that the things I told them were all things that they had been taught, but they didn't understand them until I said them. And I've also known nurses who've come to me and said, "I was a nurse for 20 years and I didn't understand what you were saying until I became a patient."
Yes, sometimes
so
you have to put
we
them...
do teach them, but it's something happens. It's not quite enough, isn't it? It's how do you put yourself into somebody else's
shoes? Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, Mari. Sometimes they have to become a patient to see from the other side. Yes, like you said, she'll be one of the nurses been working for 20 years, so they sort of deal automatically, with the procedures. Okay, this is what I need to do, without sort of touching that emotional aspect. Also, Mari, when we work in NHS, every year we need to do health and safety, fire sort of safety courses, trainings online. Would compassion and empathy, would not that be part of that training? Something to think about it. And again, Mari, I was just thinking about the CQC, the Care Quality Commissioning. They do inspect, they inspect hospital from health and safety aspects. Would they not touch about how hospital is compassion, or how do they deal with loneliness? Could that not be introduced?
Yeah, I know that they do look at compassion.
All right.
But they come at they come for quite a brief visit, and they have a very strict agenda. So they've just been to our hospital and they wanted to see emergency and this and they don't.
Specific,
but it's a very short time, and I don't know how much time they talk to patients really.
Sometimes they do. They go on the wards and talk to patients. If they've been fed and. Yes, the hospital where I'm from, recently had quite a bad reputation with patient care. touching up another aspect, I remember a while ago they've introduced a "Hello, my name is" campaign.
Oh yes.
So all the nurses and the professionals, they had those badges, and that kind of added some sort of a personal aspect, don't you think?
Well, I was the person who led that campaign.
Did you? Oh wow!
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, to get the staff to say their names.
Yes.
And then they started to have a name badge.
Yes.
And I realised that once you're getting older, that badge needs to be quite big, because otherwise you're peering at somebody like that. But just to have a name was important.
Yes.
Because otherwise you find yourself in bed and somebody says, oh, I don't know, you say, oh, I thought I was going to have an injection, and they said, "Who told you that?" And you're trying to say, "Well, it was the woman with the long hair."
With the long hairs. Yes.
You know, you having the staff name is important.
Yeah.
And I say I was part of that campaign, and since then,
well done.
More experiences. I have said to them, "Don't forget that you need to keep saying it. Don't only tell them once, because they're surrounded by so many people, they might not remember."
No, it's still ongoing, and even on the
and it's important as well, because they've all got uniforms on, which is even harder for you to
distinguish.
Yes.
Or the one in the blue or in the purple. Yeah.
That's right. Yes. No, that isn't a very important one, isn't it? That you know their name as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just tell you this story just because it's quite funny. I was teaching some children in the hospital. I had a different job, and a group of children came in, and we were showing them the equipment in the emergency department and things. And I said, I showed them what a surgeon would wear and the nurses, and I put the mask on and a long gown and a hat, and said, why do you think I would wear these? And they said, because if you accidentally killed me, nobody would know who you are. And I think that's a
good summary.
Yes. Sort of similar to having their name on. I think some nurses felt, oh, do you want to know our names? What if? But But it is important that you've got a real connection with them, especially when they're wearing masks. And so it's even more important.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thanks.
I would add, of course, Care Quality Commission, maybe the Care Quality Commission, but they send terror through hospitals because they are inspecting them.
Yes.
So they may be in charge of care, but they also can terrify. And it's easy to forget, as with doctors, as with other people, as with teachers, how even your apparently caring thing can still terrify people if it's not explained, or even if it is, because these are powerful people. Yeah, I think we have time maybe for one more question. Do you think, Gosha, as we have Jarek wanting to ask a question?
I think that it's not a question, but I have an impression that we are starting to talk about something fundamental for these relationships, that is about understanding of human being. Because when I participate in different discussions, different pedagogical discussions, in many times I ask myself a question: do we talk about education of human being, or do we talk about treatment of an object who should be shaped? So it goes not about the competences, also about the competences, but not only about the competences, but about it goes about understanding of human being who is not object of our treatment, but subject of the process. And it is also a problem because I teach theory of education at Nicolaus Copernicus University, and I see that the students who will be in some years teachers don't understand that the students they will teach will not be an object of some processes, but participants of the educational processes, and they have to understand, they have to think, then they have to indicate some aims, some goals to realize in their lives. So thank you very much.
Yeah. I just would end then with what I started off by talking about Maya Angelou, saying about you remember how people made you feel. I did read something, and it's been attributed to a number of different people, so I'm not sure who really said it, but for a very long time ago, it might have been Plato, but Julian will tell me if I'm wrong, saying about it's just as important for the doctor to know the person who has the disease as to know what disease the person has. It's something like that. You've got to know the person, not just the illness. I've probably got that wrong, Julian, but you can tell me that later on. Yeah, it's important to know the person who has the disease and not just the disease that the person has. Probably wasn't Plato, but you can tell me.
It was you, Marie. So
oh, right, okay, good.
Happy with that. Thank you, and thank you, Jarek. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone who's participated, who's asked questions, made comments. It's been a really interesting in terms of the study of solitude, the study of all of these issues for me too. Gosha, do you want to say anything before we start closing? I can't quite see you, Gosha, but do you want to say anything as Vice?
I would like to thank you, Marie, again. And I have such an impression that was a cure for all of us. I mean, it's hard to express, but a kind of healing, because I think that we've all experienced this loneliness, or our close ones, and this being treated disrespectfully as well. So when I was listening to you, I feel like being cured in some way, that there is still a chance, there is still a hope that something can be changed, and that we also, as patients, as people of medical services who are with us today, we can have the influence over these things. And that is really hopeful. So thank you, Marie, once again for that cure.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, no, Michael, sorry, you just put your hand up.
No, sorry, wrong.
No, that's okay. But thank you for taking part. Thank you, everybody. Do go to the website and join the ISRS if you're not already there. I hope to see, well, I know I will be seeing a number of you in different forums, different ways. It's been a good, lively afternoon, and thank you so much, Marie, for taking part. I know you said you suffer from imposter syndrome, but you are definitely not an imposter here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you in Poland.
Bye-bye.
See you, Marie.
Bye-bye, Barbara. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.